Yorkers are remembering Malcolm X to honor what would have been his 100th birthday. From his inspirational words to his fight for Black empowerment, Dave Carlin reports on a pair of gatherings in Upper Manhattan.
Happy birthday to you.
This birthday cake, and feeling inspired to follow and carry forward the legacy of Malcolm X here at National Action Network headquarters in Harlem on what would have been the 100th birthday of the civil rights icon.
We are here looking for truth and justice for our father, for our mother, African diaspora, and all other peoples around the world.
Daughter Ilyasa Shabazz demanding to know more about her father's murder on February 21st, 1965 in New York City. He was 39 years old, survived by widow Dr. Betty Shabazz, an educator and civil rights activist who died in 1997, and 6 children. The family's attorney is Ben Crump.
We have formally requested that the FBI release the Malcolm X papers, just as they have released the papers on JFK, RFK, and MLK. The emotional pathway of that bullet must stop in this generation.
Reverend Al Sharpton, the founder and president of the National Action Network, was asked how to move forward in Malcolm's name.
Whether it's using social media technology, AI, or mainstream media, by any means necessary. That's how we fight.
We did a lot of stuff that was good for us.
More gatherings planned for Monday night, including a gala at this location. The Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Recreational Center on Broadway at West 165th Street is where they'll remember and honor this influential leader. Dave Carlin, CBS News, New York.
Here, Maldonado Marcos.
So, hey everyone, I have a guest that'll be joining us. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. My name is Margaret Hill. I'm the executive director and one of the founders of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. Today, throughout the country and globally, people are honoring Malcolm X's 100th birthday. Throughout the weekend, there were numerous events, and it will continue. And Muslim Arc will continue with some programming and some deep discussions that we plan on having about the charge that Malcolm X had left us with in his passing. So I am definitely inviting everyone who has an event, has a recording, has media that is related to Malcolm X to tag us on that. This weekend, I was actually able to enjoy the Malcolm X Jazz Festival, and that actually inspired our posting of highlighting Malcolm X in popular media. Many of us learned about Malcolm X through popular media, whether that was in hip hop music, where a number of artists in the late 80s and 90s had utilized clips of Malcolm X's speeches in their recordings. And with the 1992 film, that many of us were inspired by his message. So as we commemorate Malcolm X's 100th birthday, let's think about his impact on culture, on politics, and the evolution of the ways that he's been depicted. And so I'm waiting for my guest, Janara Waheed, to join us for this conversation. But I wanted to kind of really highlight the role, like the impact that Malcolm X has had on Muslim Arc's mission. For those who joined us early on, 10 years ago, and many of our founding principles was one of those was based on Malcolm X's emphasis of putting faith into action, of really living by our words. So we couldn't just think anti-racism. We weren't necessarily focusing on just the right words, but putting that into action. Liberation theology. So that has been influenced by Malcolm X, a Black liberation theology in particular. And so you could read up more on that and the types of questions that Malcolm X raised as far as like what was the role of faith in our freedom struggles, right? What does it mean to be faith inspired, and how did Malcolm X inspire not just Muslims, but Christians, people of all faiths towards liberation. Nowadays, especially in the past year and a half, there has been an increased discussion of Malcolm X in Gaza, Malcolm X's views on Palestine. And so, what charge has Malcolm X left us with thinking about transnational solidarity? He had talked extensively about decolonization, right, and African and Asian liberation struggles as those countries were shaking off the shackles of colonization. And we have his famous tour that he had that was worldwide, where he visited several countries in Africa and the Middle East to talk about liberation, challenge white supremacy. So while his image we see it online with CBS and everything, we do have, there was a time when people really vilified Malcolm X. And you could see that within the archives, where there are articles that disparaged him and his legacy. And look at how they're talking about him now. I started out this video with a video from CBS highlighting the call of his family with his daughter Ilyasa Shabazz, who was arguing or asking the government to release the Malcolm X tapes, to release them very similar to how JFK tapes were released. There's more that we need to know about who's behind the assassination of Malcolm X. So that was a very powerful moment, that still the fight for justice, 60 years past of the people who had killed Malcolm X, and all those involved, and in fact state involvement in Malcolm X, he has not been brought to full justice. So now I'm going to bring on to our discussion Janara Wahid, and we're going to add you to the stage. Here you go.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So I didn't know if you had like a brief overview. I opened up our discussion with a 2-minute video from CBS, which featured the press conference that Malcolm X's family. They had a press conference and they were calling on the release of the Malcolm X files and some of the celebrations. So throughout this evening, what's happening now is still galas in honor of Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz to honor their legacy. And I talked briefly about how throughout the weekend, there have been commemorations, and they got to hear me ramble a little bit about the role of Malcolm X, like how people were introduced to Malcolm X through popular culture, but also that there's now a lot more popular culture featuring Malcolm X. So there's a new generation of people that are learning about Malcolm X 100 years after the year of his birth. So yeah, I mean, maybe you can share with us like your impression of the commemorations, and yeah, anything else you would like to talk about as far as like Malcolm X's legacy and how we can take we can make sure that we're passing on the mantle.
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest things that stood out when I went to a couple of events, I've seen a lot of older people there, like my age and older. So I was kind of thrown back, like, who don't want to celebrate Malcolm X, right? So I'm thinking the younger generation might be a little unfamiliar with his contributions. And I think that's really one of the biggest things. Like, we have 100 years, but maybe like 60 something years of looking at his life and legacy. after he passed, because he died at 39, same as Martin Luther King died at 39. And because of that, and the dean would say he haven't fully maturated, right? We didn't even see his maturation, his full maturation, although Malcolm X as a figure was phenomenal. But after he hit 40 and longer, those years of wisdom and knowledge, we can only imagine what he had to contribute to our community and the society. Some of the things that I took away from just being around the other individuals is just the spirit of resolve to keep this struggle alive. This is something that he inspired in a lot of us, his resolve to struggle through some very, very tumultuous times. Because if you can keep in mind, like we are looking at these things are happening today, and we didn't have the COINTELPRO of then, we got the internet and all this other stuff, COINTELPRO type 2.0, right? So those who are in these movements and in these spaces, um, we can see how strong he must have been to go through that in that age, and how resilient we must be to go through it now with the COINTELPRO 2.0 internet version and deep state and all these other terms that we picked up this new generations, right? But yeah, I was really surprised at the amount of the missing youth that was engaged in the understanding of Malcolm X and what he contributed, not only as what we'll call an African American individual, but also to the Americas. When we say that, we're thinking of all the way from North America to South America, and even abroad to some of the other countries that he visited, his contributions there. I know in Ghana, they're doing a commemoration as well of Malcolm X Day because of what he did in aligning the national stage, of what human rights and the human rights that he stood for as well.
Thank you for bringing up the human rights framework, right? It's like that, then that way there's a more kind of universal understanding of human rights. So Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, we are a human rights education organization. This was influenced, right, by Malcolm X of broadening it. Like we weren't just talking about civil rights. We're not just talking about the rights of citizens, but what are universal human rights? What are those rights towards dignity, right? And so to think about the struggles of Black people during the civil rights movement, and then to connect that, right, to the rights of people globally, and to have that type of discussion. And so we're hoping to do like some more deeper dives into human rights. This is like 10 years into Muslim Arc. We still have not taught a course on human rights, and what are the human rights struggles, and how are human rights, like how did people like Malcolm X, right, were when he broadened his discussion, right, to human rights. I think it's also just important, like as we're thinking about our own history, there is that pushback to with this administration is to attack the very institutions that are upholding our history, right? They're attacking the Smithsonian Museum, the African American Museum, right? They're looking at objectionable content. When I first started college, I may just like age myself. There were people that just felt like we should not know about Malcolm X. They mischaracterized him. He was vilified. And so if we have this right-wing movement, they may try to erase somebody like Malcolm X and the important role that he played. And then also the role that he played in not just the United States, but globally in anti-colonial movements, and his critique of white supremacy and colonialism and oppression globally. So it's just so powerful. Like his message is so powerful, and that we need to make sure that we know who our ancestors are. And that also includes Betty Shabazz. So her story is very important. And I really loved how the film did highlight her role as educator, And she was critical in maintaining his legacy and getting his story out. Many of us know his story from Alex Haley's autobiography, but there was a lot more that was out there. So maybe Janara, can you share a little bit of like where do you learn about, learn more about Malcolm? What do you read? What do you watch?
So one of the things, you have to listen to his speeches. If you haven't heard like the Ballad or the Bullet and been able to say like, wow, and his metaphors, I mean, it's prolific. The way he used the English language to kind of describe, we got the Democrats and the Republicans and what they do. We have the fox and we have the wolf. The wolf, the wolf, the wolf, everyone's afraid of the wolf, right? He's a bigger animal, but the fox, he's smaller. I'm gonna say it like this. He's gonna seduce you. You're gonna like him and he's gonna make you happy and everything else. But guess who eats more sheep? It's not the fox. It's not the wolf. It's the fox. And we
Wow.
have to be careful to realize that, because I'm in California and the um, largest prison population in the world is in California. So we are progressive, as they say. So we got a lot of foxes running around, and this is something that reading and studying history and how he used the language in the history to kind of show us when he talked about the Mau Mau movement in Kenya is prolific. I mean, just the way he's able to use what we call it nomenclature, the language of the time, to kind of introduce these very complicated and convoluted ideals and principles. When he talked about what the Bandung Conference, 1955, and how these world powers draw up the colonial powers, or the colonial powers was drawing up the map, and how the people were fighting back right after World War II, and how they seen an opening for them to actually gain some power and independence. And how he showed that this is not an issue where one person is going to make a difference. He brought in the OAAU, right? He created an organization, the Organization of African American Unity, right? And in his creating these things, he was talking about not just on a religious sense, because one of my favorite individuals who's still in prison right now, we remember him as Ace Rat Brown, right? Who's still locked up right now, Imam Jamil Alameen, and how we look at these figures and how they use that language in that time to platform some of the grievances of our community and to put it on a more of a national stage. Um, and how we can look into today and figure out how we can move the pendulum. I was listening to someone talk about the ideals of progressiveness versus what we call a decline in society, what they consider progressive societies, right? And how one hiccup, you can go 100 years back in the past with one hiccup in these so-called democratic societies. And this person was speaking about that probably about 30 years ago. And we're seeing that. We have one election of one individual, and he's reversing things that have been established for 100 years or so. And these are some of the things that when we think of Malcolm and his hard work, it gives us a lot of hope for the future, because what I explain to other people is Malcolm is like, he's an ancestor at the same time we can give birth to more Malcolms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like should be our goal, to develop individuals who can lead us and have the knowledge and understanding to bring us to a new future that we can actually, what we are imagining our future to be today, right? Because a lot of times we like to, in the what we call the social realms where we're seeking social justice, we talk about imagining our future. What kind of future do we want? Not the kind of future we have, but what kind of future we want. And when Malcolm was struggling and talking about what he imagined the world to be, it gave us hope, because we can see him moving forward in that direction. The same way we should be encouraging our youth to get engaged, to reimagine the world. So we have to tell them about the world that used to be, as Malcolm did, talking about Black history. So, given even in the Islamic principles, talking about Bilal beyond the Adhan, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things, like with some of the religious ideals, is it can be stagnating as well, culturally stagnating. And sometimes it's by design. You don't even see yourself in your religion and your belief system, right? And then
Yeah, and that's I just
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I
No,
just
no.
wanted to maybe like kind of chime in, right? Like or kind of expand a few things that you had talked about. And one, it's like the imaginary. So with like how we can imagine ourselves. And so with Malcolm X, he allows us to see somebody who can reconstruct themselves, to redefine themselves. He obviously, like, he has a life trajectory, like from his own family's history. So knowing a little bit more about his history can actually help us understand United States history, right? His mother is Afro-Caribbean. His
Yes.
father was a Pan-Africanist and he was murdered. The family was broken up, right? He faced discrimination in school. He got his older sister, the one who actually eventually introduced him to Islam, Ella Collins, is often
Mhm.
erased, right? And so, but he had two siblings who were Muslim. And so the story, as far as like how do people become Muslim at the time, like it's sometimes simplified. But what we get in the story and popular conception is like Malcolm X, a man who was in the prison industrial, he was in the criminal justice system. He was impacted, right? And he was able to meet with world leaders, right? Like, so it's like there is that kind of, he was self-educated, and he had so much, and he was able to rise in the ranks through going through the Nation of Islam. And then that leadership that he had this natural leadership and charisma. And but it was also, and I know like there's like Dr. Maythel Hassan talks about Malcolm X, the organizer. Zahira Ali so talks about Malcolm X, like the truth teller. And like there's so many different ways that people have talked about in very meaningful ways. But I'm definitely interested in like, what is the role of Malcolm X for those who may be on the margins of our communities, and what does it mean for them to be inspired by his message?
Especially for Muslims, I know a lot of Muslims who could tell you they're reading the autobiography of Malcolm X is a conversion story, because they can see the worst of a society brung out of an individual and the best of the individual coming out through the deen. And for the people of today, it's really hard to imagine some of the barriers in which Malcolm X has to go through. Because today, I remember there's a movie called Claudine, and it talks about how they created systems of like welfare systems, where they created systems where they keep the black men out of the family, right? If you wanted some aid, you get, so today that doesn't really exist that way. So we can't even imagine this Jim Crow South that he's going through to survive. So the hope is, if you can imagine, or you can read his history or learn more about him and see the impediments that was in his way and his development, then you could see your own self and your struggles, and then how you can overcome those struggles. And I think that's one of the messages that Malcolm X have in his life. It's like the overarching message. Like, if I was here and I got to hear, right, then it's saying that we can all do this, right? This is an ability that we can do. And I have to go back to the youth again, right? We have to bring them and empower them in that way so they can see themselves being the next Malcolm, being the next Betty Shabazz. I mean, because like you said about Miss Shabazz, after Malcolm passed, she was a torch bearer. She was part of groups and organizations and was moving things, big things like the what we call it, the New African Movement, right? She was a part of that with Robert Williams. So all these individuals and what we call the vanguard of this movement, she was part of that. They were literally calling her Madam President, right? Because she was this was our Queen Mother, as they called her, right? She had this high ranking because he was our prince. And a lot of people might think, oh, this is a little shirky, but honoring those who sacrifice themselves to make the world better is showing like honor and respect for your elders. And this is one thing we have to be recognizing as individuals, as Malcolm X says, right? Don't let them tell you who's your allies, right? They'll have you hating your friends and loving your enemies. You got to listen to his speeches. I mean, it's phenomenal. The
Definitely.
way,
So I
yeah.
just want to say, like, there is one speech that is circulating, and it is not Malcolm X. So be aware there's a difference with like AI and what is actually available. So if you can go to the archives, there are collections of Malcolm X's recorded speeches, his writings. They're available, and make sure you're double checking and fact-based checking, because there was something that was like recently circulating and went viral,
Mhm.
and it actually wasn't him, but there is a lot of like resources out there. So, and if you're kind of like, like from filmmaking, like, yes, there's like films like Genius, and this is the 2024, so this is one of the latest ones of that Genius MLK/X. And so that's something I'm going to be watching tonight, so I'm going to be watching that season of the anthology. There was like, and there's a documentary, Who Killed Malcolm, but where can people get some of his speeches? And like, maybe you could talk a little bit about what those speeches mean to you.
So one of the things, NPR has this great library of his speeches. And I think we underestimate like the public library type systems, right? The natural things that we have in the society that helps us educate ourselves, right? So these books that the library could provide for you, and I encourage people to get library cards. They got virtual cards now. So you can go to a virtual library, check out the information. And this is a layer of security against fraud and all these other things that can happen, especially with this technology today, right? The AI generated Malcolm speech. But definitely in some of my favorite speeches that Malcolm did is talking about the work that he did and how it was a work of love. One of the things that they were kind of attributing to Malcolm was he has hate speech. And he was saying they were expressing how he's telling people to hate their enemies. And he's like, no, this is something of love. This is in order to dedicate your life. And he dedicated his life to this work. It's a struggle of love. He's saying it wasn't just love of his people, but he, in his language, you can hear him saying to the American people, we're trying to save you too. You can come willingly or unwillingly, but if you don't come, I give a lot of examples about seeing death and destruction, which we see today with Palestine is visible. If it don't touch you, I question your humanity. If there are some struggles that you see other people going through and it doesn't move you to want to help other people, and this is why we can see the love that Malcolm had for his community, because it touched him to the point where he said, well, I have influence over this group of people, and this is what we can do to keep us all safe, because that's what's the big concern. And I think looking at that as an overall, or trying to go to that and get that information and kind of extract that out of his lectures and out of his all the other things that people are writing, if you see something other than the love that Malcolm had for what work he did for the community, you're probably not reading the right material, right? Because that's someone who's trying to put out something negative about Malcolm, or trying to show that he was out about any means necessary and kill everybody, right? Because if you know about Malcolm and see his charisma and how he actually hardly ever carried a weapon, if you talk to the people who walked with Malcolm, he didn't carry weapons. The picture they had with him is after they firebombed his house, and he was doing what's called a patrol. Now, someone just blew up your house, you patrolling your house with anything you had to keep your family safe. And that's where it's like they take a snippet of this individual, the same they did with the Black Panthers, right? We get these black leather jackets and these gloves and these guns, and we thinking this is what they were about. Free lunch programs, right? And who did they look up to? Malcolm, right? Where we get this free healthcare services, right? When they was doing these free clinics, they were doing these free clinics. All these things are showing the love that these people have for their community. And it wasn't just about African Americans, it's love that they have for their community as whole. That means all the people in the community.
Thank you. And that's also very important. I mean, when we start to study major figures, right? 100 years of someone's life who touches millions, but there's also a lot of people who have an influence in their lives. And so what you start to see is like Malcolm's life was he brought together numerous people. Like there was an Asian American woman that was involved. There was, there was some of the stories of the Sudanese scholar who taught Malcolm X, who gave Malcolm X his janazah. There was an Arab American woman who actually helped arrange Malcolm X's Hajj. Betty Shabazz's pilgrimage, like who helped arrange that? The Christian communities, celebrities who actually supported maintaining Malcolm X's legacy and supported the family. So it's so important for us to remember the people who support the icons, so we have to move beyond the icons and see them as human beings that were part of families, that were part of communities, that organized, and that we can understand that kind of relational power that they had, as opposed to, it's not just the words that move people, but our leaders, it is their relationships, the ways that people felt empowered to act by the guidance that they gave, by the leadership, by the skills, of bringing people together. So I think there may be some next levels of how we need to understand Malcolm X's life and the words, right? What was he asking us to do that can empower us to take charge of our future? It wasn't just he was a messiah and things were going to open up for us, right? So it's very, very powerful, very, very important for us to start to think 100 years later, where were we at 100 years ago? Are Black people, are we in a better place, right? All the countries that were under colonialism during this interwar period in 1925, are they independent? Do we have work to do, right? We're seeing genocide, we're seeing exploitation, we're seeing colonization, we're seeing military occupation. So are we charged with the Afro-Asian solidarity and, like Central and South American, Caribbean solidarity, right, of the global majority? What is the solidarity of, what is the role of white allies, white folks, to liberate themselves from being either from the economic oppression or aligning with the oppressor class? So we have a lot to think about over the next year, like what Malcolm X had said. And, our team, we're actually excited to kind of do some deeper dives and to continue the discussion, because we're honoring him throughout this month and beyond. So we're going to take a whole month to do this kind of work. And we look forward to sharing out the resources and things that we find, and really hope that more people who follow us join us on this journey, and that we also think about ways that we can invest in creating curriculum at Muslim schools, at secular schools, to better understand Malcolm X, right? We can't just wait if they're pulling this out of the curriculum, we got to make sure that our young people get the curriculum, whether it's weekend schools, after school programs. And he just has such a really storied life, right? That it just really is both inspiring, but it also, I think, for a lot of the young generation, can learn a lot without, about his life and be both inspired and challenge their conceptions around the civil rights movement. And how does that link up with today?
We have to tell the Malcolm X stories. Yes, we
Mhm.
do. We still have people who were alive during that time.
Mhm.
So we need to make sure we're telling his stories, because we don't tell the younger people, the younger generation, it's going to be lost in history. And we all know that, stories lost, they lose its meaning, because we can talk about Malcolm today like they talk about MLK, and he lose all meaning. When you have a Klan member bringing up of Martin Luther King, you're like, what? Did he say Martin Luther King? And what we'll have next is some of these political people spinning, the ideals and identities of these individuals. We might even have elected officials talking about any means necessary, right? and, and so people be following them, and we'll have this whole line of things like they appropriated something that was for us and for the people. I mean, it can go way down that rabbit hole.
Well,
I don't
I've
want
seen
to.
it. So since we do Muslim anti-racism, so I have seen people co-opt Malcolm X's message to try to argue that we should not talk about Black things. When he founded the organization African Unity, right? Like he did both. You could do both things, right? That,
Right.
and so, but they were arguing for the silencing of that by misquoting or out of context, right? And so there is that within our co-religionists. So I would not be surprised that would extend beyond as we think about like other, like for whatever, so we got to be wary of how our leaders' messages can be depicted and weaponized. Their words could be weaponized to go against the very spirit of what they were working for, which was like Black liberation. And he, and in liberating Black people from oppression, liberates all people. He did not do it at expense of other people. He was for transnational solidarity in fighting oppression.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's where, I remember I'm from the South, Alabama. I
Mhm.
remember watching the show, and they had a rooster crowing, and everybody signified that was morning time because the rooster crowed. But if you're from the country, the rooster crows whenever it feels like it. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be sunrise. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't make the sun come up. I mean, these kind of folklore, um, these myths can be inundated and weaponized, like you said, Marguerite. They can be weaponized, and they can do damage to our communities where we don't even know who Malcolm is anymore. So, as individuals ourselves and to all our communities, we have obligations to talk about Malcolm, to say what he did, what kind of legacy he left. And I always try to argue that one of the bigger things about Malcolm is, if we don't realize that this system might have stunted his growth and development. Not saying like we kind of take that narrative of Malcolm, despite all of the things, he was able to achieve all these things. And I was imagining a world, and we talk about imagining a world, where he was given all the tools he needed to show his greatness in other ways as well. It's kind of like if people left Einstein to mop floors, right? What would the world be missing right now? And this is what I think about when I see the young people today. We have Malcolm X's, we have Einsteins, we have all these individuals. And if we're not nurturing them, if we're not giving them what they need to grow and develop, we are missing out as a
Yeah,
community, as a society.
it is definitely a huge loss in that. And so, like, as we close out, we want to make sure that so there's been some links shared out to the Shabazz Center. So there's things that we can do to uplift the legacy of Malcolm X. And the first one is go to the Shabazz Center and support, right? We need to make sure we're uplifting the continual efforts to support his legacy. We need to continue to learn. Go to the primary sources, listen to his speeches, watch the documentaries, read the books. So there are several books that have come out about Malcolm X. I wouldn't just stop at the autobiography, because that is like something that was kind of crafted as very moving. But there are even more books that have come out about Malcolm X, about Betty Shabazz, about Ella Collins. There's children's books about it. So there are more age appropriate materials. You can even support Muslim Arc. We are, in our work, would be working with partners to create curriculum for like age appropriate curriculum, so that our students can continue to learn about Malcolm X from a human rights perspective, from an anti-racism perspective. So those are two things that are very important to us. So if you can just, give us, make sure you're following us, give us a share, and continue to engage with us, because we will be coming out with more and more programming that is inspired by Malcolm X. And we're going to really honor this centennial commemoration, not just this month, probably throughout the year, right? This is something just recognizing where we're at in 2025, and that we're going to draw on the legacy of our ancestors and current freedom fighters, right, to continue the work. So any last words, Gennaro?
Assalamu alaikum.
Peace be upon you all.
Peace be upon everyone. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. You have a great day.